My government will live within our means. If one of my ministers comes to me with a new project or proposal, I won't even consider it until he or she has figured out where the money will come from. Under my leadership, any new spending not already budgeted must be paid for from savings within the government. Put another way, if you decide to take a family holiday, your roof repair has to wait. You can't do both. Your bank account is not a bottomless pit, and neither is the taxpayer's pocket.
Conservative leader Andrew Scheer laid out parts of his economic policy today. Part of his plan includes creating a corridor across the country to facilitate the movement of energy resources. What would it take politically to make such an idea a reality, and how doable is his pledge to balance the books without making deep cuts? It's time, of course, for the Power Panel. In Toronto, Omar Khan of Hill & Knowlton Strategies, sitting next to former Saskatchewan Finance Minister Andrew Thompson, now Chief of Government Relations for the University of Toronto. And here with me in studio, Rachel Curran, former Director of Policy to Stephen Harper, now with Harper & Associates, and CBC's polls analyst, Eric Grenier. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Rachel, I'll start with you and just get you to help us sort of understand what the concept is when we're talking about a corridor. That was sort of like the headline out of the speech today. Obviously, there are a lot of questions around it and the viability of it. What should we interpret from what was announced? What does it mean?
Yeah, well, look, it's a bold, visionary idea. I don't think Andrew Scheer is underestimating the challenges, the political challenges, certainly in getting a project like this done. But it's also not impossible, right? Versions of this idea have been mooted for a while. Energy corridors across the province of BC, for instance. The Eagle Spirit Energy Corridor proposal is one example of that. So versions of this are floating around out there. I think what Andrew Scheer is trying to do is contrast himself really clearly with Justin Trudeau, to say, look, the energy sector is important to Canada, it's important to the Canadian economy, energy independence is important to Canada. Why are we importing Saudi Arabian oil when we have our own resources right here at home? And so I'm going to put forward an idea to address this and really get the conversation started and really distinguish himself on the big policy ideas from the Prime Minister.
How realistic, Andrew, do you think it is?
Well, it's a very nice idea, and if only people had thought about it when they were putting together Energy East or talking about how they were going to wheel power from Quebec Hydro over into the west to shut down the coal-fired plants, it would be a new idea. But this is an idea that's been around for a long time and continually runs up against pesky things like the Constitution. And I think unless there really is a practical way for Mr. Scheer to say how he's going to work with the provinces, convince Quebec that these are good ideas, this is really just nothing more than pie in the sky kind of thinking.
Omar, I want to get you to weigh in a second, but first we have a clip of Andrew Scheer talking about this, and then I believe we also have a clip of Bill Morneau responding to it. I want to play both of them for you.
A dedicated coast-to-coast right-of-way specifically set aside for energy infrastructure projects. Rather than have industry submit complicated route proposals for every new transmission line and pipeline project, we could have a single corridor, planned up front and in full consultation with the provinces and with Indigenous Canadians who would share in the prosperity that it would provide.
So now we've got Andrew Scheer proposing to pit provinces against each other with some sort of new national corridor. The approach we've taken has actually ensured that we get big things done. Just last year, we had the largest private sector investment in Canadian history, LNG Canada, creating 10,000 new jobs in British Columbia. It's an example of how we can get things done in this country. We're going to work together with people who are concerned about the environment, with Indigenous people, to get big projects done in the right way.
Omar, I'm going to ask the same type of question to you that I asked to Rachel. Help me understand what Bill Morneau means by how does this pit provinces against each other?
Well, with the current political configuration in Quebec, with the current government in Quebec, and with the previous one, mind you, this idea is dead on arrival. So unless Mr. Scheer plans on using the notwithstanding clause to override the Constitution, he may, because he does seem to be taking a lot of his cues from Doug Ford in Ontario. The idea is DOA. It's not going to happen anytime soon. It's a great idea. Look, I fully support the idea of being able to ship our energy resources from coast to coast. Unfortunately, due to the nature of our federation, it's not going to happen anytime soon. Mr. Scheer should actually focus on doing things like putting forward a climate change plan, like he said he would, I think 400 days ago or something like that. He should actually come forward and talk about what is he actually going to do? What is he going to cut to reduce the deficit or to eliminate the deficit in 2 years? He said he's going to do that. He's put forward no specifics. We saw the same thing in Ontario, in the Ontario election. And we're seeing those results now. So we're seeing cuts to public health funding. We're seeing potential cuts to school nutrition programs. I think Mr. Scheer, instead of putting forward big, broad ideas that really have no chance of success in the short term, should actually be honest with Canadians and tell them what he's actually going to do.
Okay, I definitely want us to debate the merits of what he could cut, what he should cut, if that's feasible. But I first want Eric to weigh in on this pitch. Who do you think it's aimed at, and might it make a difference with voters?
Well, this particular pitch, I don't see where it has an appeal that's very targeted, aside from people who do want to see pipelines being built. I do wonder about how simple it would be to get done if it's not possible to expand a pre-existing pipeline through one province, how to do it across 10. Energy East would have been a similar kind of concept, and that also ran into a lot of problems. And this isn't just one pipeline, it's a corridor that would presumably contain several pipelines, other lines, other transmission lines, other pieces of infrastructure. So I would imagine it would be even more complicated. So it certainly is interesting in the sense that it is something that they're proposing. We haven't seen that much from the Conservatives. It's been a lot of opposing, which is what opposition parties do. But there's starting to now be a list of things that the Conservatives are going to have in their platform. This one in particular, though, I mean, it would be appealing to people in Alberta, perhaps in New Brunswick, people who want to see pipelines going across the country. But some of the other things that he talked about, I think, might have been a bit more targeted towards the mass group of
like
voters.
Tax benefits.
Yeah, and the language he was using in terms of people's economic anxiety, I think that was what he was really trying to reach voters more than this particular proposal, which I think is a bit more of a specific thing rather than something that's going to appeal to millions of people.
On what Omar brought up.
Yeah,
you can go quickly, then I want to get Rachel in. Go for it, Andrew.
Sorry, I just want to pick up on what Eric said, because I do think this is a fairly smart strategy overall in terms of how the Conservatives are starting to roll out their ideas of how they're differentiated from the current government. Whatever is contained within this, but this idea of doing these series of policy speeches and putting more in the window than just being the opposition, I do think is an interesting approach, and showing that they are starting to really turn their attention to policy, which is, as we've spent how many weeks on here just talking about the scandals, it's nice to get a chance to start to dig into some of these other issues. Whether these are the right proposals and whether they're workable will obviously be the debate that goes into the election, but it's an interesting strategy overall.
On the question of, and there was a message of fiscal restraint in this, which is not surprising at all from Mr. Scheer. He talked about, comparing the size of the deficit versus and spending within his means. He wasn't too specific on how you accomplish that, right? Like he talked about the infrastructure bank more largely, as well as the Chinese one, but that amounts to, less than a certain amount of billions of dollars, a few $1 billion, not a lot. And
well, yeah, I mean, it is a significant sum of money in the overall context of the federal deficit. It may be a smaller number, but living within our means, what a concept. Like, there certainly is a way to return the budget to balance. It's not going to happen overnight, but Andrew Scheer is absolutely right that simply restraining the growth in government spending, it's been wildly out of control under Trudeau. Simply restraining that growth and bringing it back down to a more reasonable level will eventually return the budget to balance over a particular time frame.
Will he face questions, though, about what
well,
that
that's
means?
What the
to be fair to Omar, given what we're seeing with the Ford government, there are effects of that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there are, people are reacting.
That is the narrative the Liberals are going to want to push, that Andrew Scheer is going to cut this and he's going to cut that. You don't actually have to do much cutting. The Harper government in 2011 returned the budget to balance by doing a deficit reduction exercise that focused largely on backroom administrative costs and just controlling overall government spending and operational spending. So it is possible, and it's savings of $5.2 billion there. So simply restraining growth is often a good enough answer. But look, on the pipeline proposal, let me also say, just because it's complicated, that's no reason not to do it. Like, Scheer had a pretty good message around this. Like, let's move from a country of no to a country of yes. We're not getting projects built. We're certainly not getting. Factor? Sure, it's complicated. There's going to have to be negotiations. But the current Premier of Quebec is saying his province is open for business. He has not said flat out, no, I'm not even willing to discuss this. So the fact that Andrew Scheer wants to open the conversation is, I think, a good thing. The only reason the LNG Canada proposal went forward, which is the one Omar referenced, is that because it was approved by the Harper government and exempted from the carbon tax in BC. So we are just not getting the big projects done, and we need to get to a place where we are.
I'll give Omar the last word quickly before we get to
Well, I would be really curious to hear what Mr. Scheer will do differently than what Mr. Harper tried to do for 10 years, where we didn't get a single inch of pipeline built or constructed towards Tidewater.
Well, there was one that
we did not get a single pipeline built to take our energy resources.
There was a little bit of extra capacity thanks to an existing pipeline that was expanded, but it's not a huge amount.
Well, in northern
Both the Liberals and Conservatives now agree that the budget will just balance itself. I mean, there is a point of agreement between the two parties, and I think
Omar,
we should
go ahead.
celebrate that.
Look, at the end of the day, look, I agree. We should have. I would love to see a coast-to-coast pipeline. But we had a Conservative government for 10 years, and they didn't build a single inch of pipeline towards Tidewater. If Mr. Scheer wants to come out with this idea today, which he has, he should explain to Canadians how he's actually going to get it done. If not, let's talk about brass tacks. He said he's going to eliminate the deficit in 2 years. We've seen the impacts of moves like that in Ontario. He's clearly very close to premiers, to Conservative premiers across the country, but particularly to the Premier in Ontario. He deserves to, the Canadians deserve to hear from him what that is going to mean. He should roll that out. He should be honest with Canadians, and let's have that conversation then.
Hi, I'm Vashi Kapellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.